John Mark Comer is sitting down with Carey Nieuwhof, and he's actually going to give some insight on why not deconstructing is actually holding many Christians back. Take a look at this.
But there's a lot that I think ring pretty true. And there's one I really like out of Fuller Seminary, The Critical Journey. I would imagine you're familiar with that.
No, I don't know that.
Professors Janet Hagberg, I think, and Michael Gulick. So there is a book. It's called The Critical Journey. I did a teaching on it many years ago. You can find, that's a popular version of it. And they basically break the spiritual journey into 6 stages. We don't need to go through those. But at the end, they argue that these stages are not inevitable, that most Christians in America never mature beyond stage 3. So the first 3 stages are, stage 1 is, they call it recognition of God. Ancient Christians would call it awakening. Evangelicals would call it getting saved. Stage 2, they call the life of discipleship. They don't mean discipleship as I would use that word, but they mean like basic kind of discipleship to Jesus, learning to read your Bible, go to church, be in a small group, learning basic Christian doctrine. And then stage 3 is what they call the productive life. So you become, you do things for Jesus now. You lead a small group, or you lead a missions team, or you join the board at your church, or you become a deacon, or you become a youth pastor, or you're doing something, or you're taking your work seriously as a follower of Jesus. All beautiful things. But that's just the first half of the spiritual journey. All that to say, I think that Sunday-based churches are pretty helpful for people in those first 3 stages.
Yep.
And increasingly unhelpful after that, which is why you have this tragic phenomenon where a lot of the people that have the deepest appetite for psychospiritual development, they want to psychologically mature and they want to spiritually mature. Often the enemy is at work in all of our hearts, feel the need, let's just set aside whether it's legitimate or wildly illegitimate, feel the need to step out of Sunday-based churches and almost graduate from that in order to continue the spiritual journey.
What is beyond it for the church?
Beyond
the first 3 stages, which most of us don't get past.
In the critical journey, they name the next couple of stages. In their theory, you hit this, not a stage, but an experience that, and they label, it's not this linear. And they would say over and over again, life is not this linear. And we mature unevenly. We might be ahead in one stage, in one aspect of our life, and behind in another. But they have this concept they call the wall, which is some kind of an experience. I think of the AA line, the only way out is through. Meaning it's some kind of an experience of pain and suffering that you can't bypass or deny or fake it till you make it. It's something that will permanently stand in your path. It could be a divorce. It could be the loss of a loved one. It could be failure, bankruptcy. It could be a terminal disease or a chronic illness, any number of things. But there's no way around it. The only way out is through. And so you can either stop in your spiritual journey or regress in your spiritual journey, which is what a lot of people do. Like the phenomenon of deconstruction, one way to think about that psychologically is people go through the first 3 stages of Christian spiritual development. They hit the wall. They have some kind of experience of pain and suffering. And rather than go through it, they jump ship to another, I'll just use the word religious system. And I mean that in the more Keller sense of like a system of beliefs, ideas, values, practices that give meaning and purpose to life. That could be the 3 most common that I saw in Portland were third wave anti-racism, all things LGBTQ and pride and kind of ally kind of worldview, activist worldview, and then careerism, kind of like work is God. Those are the 3 most common alternative religions that I saw in Portland. So people jump ship and then they go back and they start at phase 1 again. It's awakening, but now it's a different religion. And so it's like they're born again and they're just on a high and they're in this honeymoon phase and I can't believe it. I never saw before and I never realized this and I was blind and I was dumb and I was lost and I've been saved. It's basically a salvation motif. And then they become a life of discipleship. Then they're learning and they're reading and they're taking all of this information in, and then the productive life. Then they're doing things and they're leading things and they're saying things. And it's just inevitable that people will hit the wall again. And then what? So in the critical journeys, the next stages, if you go through the wall, you go into stage 4 that they call the inner journey or the journey inward, which would be basically like the valley, you know what I mean? Or the wilderness. period often marked by a lot of soul searching. In millennial language, you do the work often of therapy around family of origin and your relationship to your parents and your culture and your shadow and your personality and your Enneagram number, all of that stuff. It's a good space for that. Then stage 5 is what they call the journey outward. So you go through that. And again, if you continue to mature, and people get stuck at every single one of these phases. There's some people that go into therapy and the deep work, and then 20 years later, they're still
in the deep work,
bemoaning. Still stuck.
My mom,
Still,
my dad,
I'm overwhelmed.
You're 60.
Yeah, and that's important work to do, but you don't want to get stuck there. You need to move through it. Not through it that like we're some problem to solve or some formula that you hack and fix. The human soul is way more complex than that. And I don't mean that in an unkind way at all. Just I think most people would agree there is a season, I see it a lot when people start therapy. It's like it often gets worse before it gets better. And every conversation you have with them is just very negative. And that is actually, I think, a healthy part of almost like getting the impurities out of your system. It's almost like a charcoal cleanse of your body. But you don't want to be there for the rest of your life. You want to move through that to a place of greater acceptance, gratitude, joy, seeing the good and the bad in your experience, in your family, and your parents, and all of that. And so then you go to the journey outward, which is where you kind of begin to reemerge almost into, it looks very similar to stage 3, the productive life. You're out doing things now again. You're leading often. You're serving. You're making a contribution through your church or ministry or work. But so from the outside, it looks very similar to stage 3, but it's very different because your motivational structure is radically different. You don't need what you used to need from success. There's that Rollheiser line, success still feels good in the second half of life, but it has very little to teach us. Stage 5, you're doing meaningful work, but you are different. Your motivational structure is different. You're more free. You're more detached. You're not like pure love, but you're more motivated by love. And then stage 6 is what they call the life of love. And this is just, most of the people we know in this stage are very old, but I know some people there and they just exude the love of the Trinity. And just the gift is just being in their presence. It's not even if it's a pastoral example, it's not their leadership. Most of them aren't leading actively anymore. It's not necessarily their preaching or teaching or writing, though it might be just dripping with wisdom. It's them. Like I remember visiting Eugene Peterson. I was one of the last pastor groups that got to visit him. And, and he was nearing the end. You could tell he was very elderly at that point. You could tell his body was starting to slowly kind of wind down. But it was like we always said to each other, it's like being in the presence of a saint. And he didn't say anything that we'd not read in his books. So it was not like we were
getting the last
No,
unpublished
it's like,
thoughts.
honestly, every single thing he said we'd read before. And, some of it was kind of boring. But just like being in his presence was just like the peace, the love, the sense of like union with God. You could almost like, it permeated the room. So, that's the final stage. So
when I first watched this video, it's actually earlier today, I was going to make a video on something completely different, but I had to get this out because I hear a lot of rhetoric on the internet about how deconstruction is a doctrine of demons and how it's completely demonic and this, that, and the third. And listen, don't get me wrong. The devil can act in any sort of capacity. He can interject himself into anything. There can be pastors who are activating in the demonic right now, who are acting contrary to Christ. But when I think of deconstruction, when I think of what I went through and what I would even say am going through, I would say I'm in that stage 4 right now, where I'm kind of in the 4 to 5 stage where I hit a wall. And we showed a video on my journey with deconstruction. You can go back and look at it in the cards there. But when I came out of that, I shared in that interview that I did with my friend Caleb that my belief, my faith was like in HD, where before it was only in 1080p or whatever it was. It's so much more vibrant, so much more real, so much more personal. I just realized before that, I had a lot of dogmatic views that I had been spoon-fed my whole life that I just regurgitated out. But I had never really gone through the valley with. I had never gone through pain, in hardship and had to wrestle. He said this statement later in the video. He said, this guy is walking up to this elderly priest, and he says, priest, do you still wrestle with the devil? And the priest goes, no, son, I don't wrestle with the devil anymore. I'm too old, and he's grown old as well. He said, now in my old age, I wrestle with God. And the young man says, wrestle with God? He said, surely you don't hope to win. He says, no, I hope to lose. And it's this picture of when I was younger, like I just was in my flesh and had a lot of, but as I'm grown older, I've wrestled with the Lord, and I'm allowing him to wound me and like kill some of those just youth type beliefs in me and to become something that's really weathered and true. And that's what I would just say, like my faith, when I came out of my deconstruction season, was more true, more weathered, more ancient than I could ever have imagined, more rooted in something far transcendent. And like, I didn't come out with a lot of liberal mindset views, and I know some people do. I mean, a lot of mine came out of some more theological beliefs that I had, that I had broken down, and we're gonna do some videos on those things soon, and just some things that I think are helpful. But I don't know. I want to challenge your view today of what you think deconstruction is and what the internet is projecting as deconstruction. I think, honestly, most people, and he said it in the video, they go through step 1, 2, and 3 in the church, and then they stay there at step 3. And they're a believer. I believe they're a true Christian. They love the Lord, but it is not as mature as someone who has gone through the wall and then got to the place where they're going to have to look at things. And that's the biggest difference. As I've talked to people, the people who just don't get it, it's like you've actually never really had to look at your beliefs in a moment of crisis and be like, what do I really believe? You're still just going through the dogmatic view of regurgitating. And I'm not saying if you hold different beliefs than me, that means you're just dogmatic. I can just tell when I'm talking to people, they're not understanding. And I want to encourage you. Some people probably need to deconstruct. And on the other side of deconstruction, I know it's scary, like Carrie said, but there's so much liberty in life. Why? Because the Lord will keep you. And he will guide you through that. There's like a spiritual renewal that happens once you break out of dogmatic views and you actually encounter a personal God, not just regurgitated things you've heard from a stage, but a personal God who loves you and wants to speak to you personally. My encouragement to every single person watching this video is, number 1, have a little bit more grace with the person you know who's deconstructing. Pray for them. Yes, like make sure they don't go wayward and the devil doesn't sift them. But also know that there's gold on the other side of any spiritual mountain that God asks us to climb. I'll catch you guys later. Bye.